We are going to continue in the Gospel of Matthew. That's the lectionary right now. Chapter 14. Okay, continue. Chapter 14, verses 13 through 21. This will be familiar to most of us, I would think. It's the feeding of the 5,000, according to the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus has just learned that John the Baptist, his cousin, has been killed. And immediately following this, we hear this. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cared their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. May the hearing of these words add insight and blessing to your lives. I love this story. I do. It's in all the Gospels. There are different variations in the Gospels, but we're gonna talk about Matthew. I love it. So, I can't hear this story without really, I love this denomination. I do. I love the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I am a cradle disciple. That means I was born into this denomination, right? I didn't choose it. I was born into it. It was a new church start in Florida was where I was confirmed as a baby. I still have this little tiny locket that they gave me. It doesn't fit my dainty neck now, but I still have it. That was from my confirmation. The church is no longer there. It closed up long ago, but I have that locket, and I have that introduction, that feeling of the love and being connected and held at the table that has stayed with me. So the table is such a powerful image to me. This feeding of the 5,000 it just screams, it begs for us to talk about the table. So I'm going to tell you why I think the table is so central and important to me, why I love it as part of our denomination, part of our congregation, part of my life. I've spent my whole life around a table, metaphorically and really, physically, for real, in reality, right? I grew up in a family where we ate every meal, every evening meal, especially breakfast and dinner, but especially dinner, was always we gathered and sat. There was not even an option for many, many years until we were older. You came to the table. That was it. There was a seat for you, and you came and we ate together. That's what we ate, all of our meals together. And sometimes Sometimes there's 5 kids, so there's 7 of us sitting around the table, and sometimes it could be pretty loud, and sometimes it could be pretty contentious, and sometimes there was fighting, and sometimes most often there was lots of laughter. And we shared everything about our lives that day. That was the process. It was coming together no matter what. Somebody could be throwing a fit and having a mood, but they came to the table. We didn't lock people away and say, you're not fit to be at the table. You came to the table, whatever condition. That's where I learned. I've come to understand as an adult. That's really why one of the reasons I feel so passionate about the open table and this promise that is such good news, this is the good news. It's all the good news of the gospel. This is it. It's everything. This is it. That there is a place for everybody, no matter what, at the table. And it's not just any table. It's this feast. We always live with this sense of scarcity, right? Especially in church. We think, we don't have enough. We don't have enough people. We don't have money. We don't have enough. We don't have enough. We don't have enough. What's going to happen? We don't have enough. And when we live out of this sense of scarcity, we can't really, truly feel this joy and share the joy, the good news that there is enough. The table is enough. There is enough. My family was so poor. We were really poor. I didn't really even know until I got older that we were just really, really poor. We just didn't have that much. I never knew that we didn't. Because we just always came to the table. And there was always a place, and there was always food. And you know what was also remarkable? I really, I'm not going to just do a tribute to my parents, but I will. Let me shout out to them that no matter what, as poor as we were, and I know they must have been scared at times. It must have been really scary to have 5 young children and be worried about how to feed them, whether there would be enough. And I bet there were many times that they didn't eat or ate very little so that we could eat. Probably. And I'm grateful to them. Maybe too grateful. But there was always room for more. Always. There was always the 5 of us, but it was not uncommon for us to bring friends. And my parents never said, no, we don't have enough. They never, ever said, you can't bring somebody over, we don't have enough. There was just always enough. We just always had enough. It wasn't too much, but it was always enough. And there was always an extra seat available. Isn't that amazing? What a gift. That's the gift. That's the gospel. That's what this is about. Jesus is, I would imagine, grieving. If I were going to identify an emotion for Jesus in this moment, he's just learned of this horrible death of someone he loves very dearly, John, the baptizer. John is beheaded. It's a horrible death. And we know he needs to be alone. It says after he hears this, he immediately goes off. In the New Revised Standard Version, which I read to you, it says to a deserted place. But really, this is important. I want you to get this. It's really important. The Greek word that's being translated in this as a deserted place, not that that's a bad translation, it's okay. It's true. But a better translation would be the wilderness. Why would I want you to know that? I want you to know that because everything starts in the wilderness. Everything we know, all the good stuff comes first from the wilderness. John the Baptizer comes out of the wilderness, right? That's where he comes from. Jesus comes out from this wilderness place. Jesus goes to the wilderness to be tempted before he even begins to accept his calling, right? That beautiful baptism scene. He's baptized, but that's not really the true beginning. That he still gets to go to the wilderness and has to be tempted and think about, am I going to take this call? Am I going to do this thing? He's out there in the wilderness. all the good stuff happens, right? That's where we go metaphorically at Lent, right? We go intentionally to the wilderness. The Israelites, where do they go? They go to the wilderness. I gave you the answer. They go to the wilderness. They're wandering around out there, right? They leave Egypt. They are led out into the wilderness, and then they're like, wait a minute, what is happening? And they're out there trying to figure stuff out for 40 years in the wilderness. So hang on to that. It's important. Jesus goes off to be alone. Something really big has happened. It's this horrific, awful thing has happened. The world has shifted. Nothing looks the same anymore. He goes off. He just needs to be alone. I like Jesus because I like Jesus for a lot of reasons, but I also really appreciate that I think he's probably an introvert. Got to get that alone time. Got to have some solitude. Need to feel restored and reconnected, right? Through prayer, through your energy. He goes off. And I want to point out something else, because I've never before have I heard anybody mention this, nor have I in this particular story. I've never talked about the boat in this story. When we talk about boats, when you hear a boat in the gospel, I'm sure you've probably heard me say before, that when we hear the boat, you should almost always, when there's a boat involved, you have to think that's the church. The boat represents the church, metaphorically. I've never really thought about it in this text. I've never really thought about Jesus goes off in a boat to be alone. So I was thinking about it this week, like he goes off in a boat, and if we think about that boat as a church, right, that represents the church. There's Jesus out in this boat alone. But the crowds are hungry. They're hungry for something. They've gotten this bad news too, maybe. Maybe that's part of it. You know, John the Baptizer has disciples of his own, his followers. Like maybe it's that. There's this unsettling. Maybe it's just the whole thing with the empire, and maybe it's just the weariness of the world looking so hard and being so hard and difficult, and they're hungry for something. They just come out. Jesus is out there in the boat by himself, trying to get away. Have you ever done that? I have. You just think, I got to get away from all that. I just think I can't deal with it. I don't want to deal with it. I do that sometimes when I drive to the hospital in the morning. I go early in the morning. I have to be there at 6:30, and I drive to the hospital, and I just think, I just don't want to think about all the stuff that there is happening in the world. I don't want to, and every morning at this particular corner, there's at least one or two people on the sidewalk, like 6:15 in the morning, with a blanket. One sits at a bus stop, and they have this blanket, and they're just their body. They almost look like zombies, just defeated and sleeping. And there's usually somebody just sprawled out on the sidewalk with a blanket pulled up over them, and it just looks so. And I think, I can't not see that. I can't ignore it, right? I think I imagine Jesus in the boat. These people are just coming out, and they're following him on the shore. Can you picture this? Can you picture this? 5,000 men, not counting the women and children, so like triple it, maybe. That's a lot of people. Hungry, needing something, just watching him in the boat on the shore, hungry for something. And Jesus, I love this line, Jesus has compassion. That's what the Gospel of Matthew tells us. Isn't that good news too? Come on, people, listen to that. Jesus has compassion. It's no joke. How come How come when we quote the Bible and use it as a hammer to hit it over, over people's heads and we want to punish people by quoting scriptures, how come nobody ever quotes Jesus had compassion? Never hear him quote that. Isn't that too bad? But usually they don't quote Jesus. Jesus has compassion. Such good news for everybody. And so he comes back to the shore. I think, gosh, maybe, what can we learn from that? He's out in the boat, trying to be alone, trying to have solitude, dealing with his own stuff, thinking that he has compassion. And he comes back to the people who are hungry for something. You ever been spiritually hungry? You ever really been hungry? You can't feed, you can eat a Snickers bar. I know the commercial will tell you that, but that doesn't really fill you up, right? It doesn't really, it's not sustenance. They're hungry for something more. They're hungry for something more. They're curious. And he comes, and he walks amongst them, and he heals their sick. Man, do you love this or not? I mean, this is who we are following. This is who we proclaim. This is who we should proclaim. Walking amongst them, healing their sick, talking to them, ministering to them, just out where they are. Did you know that 5,000 people, that's a lot? I mean, we think that's a lot, right? But did you know that in the first century, most of these little towns and villages around Galilee and in Israel where Jesus is going wouldn't come close to that many people? That's an outrageous number. That maybe Jerusalem, a city, would have that many people, but none of the towns. Like, it's Jesus, there is a city's worth of people gathered out in the wilderness. Wow. Hungry. And he's feeding them, spiritually feeding them by caring for them. Like, it doesn't say that he sits down and just preaches, right? That's not really what it says. He says he goes amongst them and heals their sick. He goes amongst them. What would it be like if we actually went amongst those who are hungry in our world right now? We lament. I lament. I hear people lament every day. We're lamenting this. We don't know what to do about this epidemic of fentanyl and the overdoses and the drugs and the homelessness that we are seeing in record numbers in this broken world that we live in our society that doesn't offer enough affordable anything for housing. Work, you can find work, but it's hard to find work that will pay enough. So I was walking yesterday and I saw a room for rent. And I thought, oh, there's a little apartment for rent. And I stopped out of curiosity, and 1 bedroom, 1 bath, 1,000 square feet, $1,595 a month. Who can afford that? Wouldn't it be amazing if we brought the boat back to shore and we walked along in the wilderness and actually walked among and healed, did what we could to heal the sick? I mean, because after all, lest you think we shouldn't do that, Jesus commissions all of us. That's it. Jesus commissions the disciples. He sends the disciples out. So when the disciples come to him, and they say, okay, listen, we're in the wilderness, and it's a dangerous, chaotic place. The wilderness is chaotic. It's dangerous. It's getting dark. We got to get people out of here because it won't be safe soon, is what they're saying. It's not going to be safe. So the safest thing to do is to send them back to the towns so that they can safely find some place to purchase their food, to be safe out of the wilderness. And Jesus says, no, they can stay here. they can stay here with me in the wilderness. And here's what you're going to do. You're going to feed them. Did you hear that? Jesus said, he didn't say, don't worry, I'll take care of it. He said, they're going to stay here and you feed them. That's a commissioning, friends. That's a way of being commissioned. That's not even a calling. That's like you have been called and now you are commissioned. You go feed them. Go feed them. You do it. I brought the boat to the shore. I'm here, but you have work to do too. Wow, so interesting. I just love Jesus. I do. I love Jesus. They are stunned. They're like, well, we can't. How do we do that? Sure, how do we do that? We don't have enough. We don't. Look at what we don't have. What could we possibly offer? We only have enough for us. This is our food. These are our 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. This is enough maybe for the 12 of us and you and whoever else is gathered in our in crowd. Like we have enough for this. But for all these people, it's a city. It's a city in the wilderness. How could we feed them? Now this is where Jesus says, okay, I am going to do something. Bring it. Bring all this food. Gather it up. Bring it. That's what I say to my dog. I do. I say that. He wants to play, and he'll look at me, and I'll say, well, go get it. Bring it. And he goes and gets his toy. That's what Jesus says. Go get it. Gather it up. Bring it here. And then he gathers the crowd. He says, everybody sit down. Sit down in the wilderness. Have a seat. Relax in the wilderness. It's getting dark. Don't be afraid. What's a little chaos? Sit. We're going to bring some peace and wholeness. A movement for wholeness in a fragmented world. We're going to bring some wholeness here into this chaotic, barren place. We're going to create a giant table right here. We're going to have this feast in this barren wilderness. You're going to experience something amazing here. Have a seat. Sit down. 5,000 men plus women and children sit down. And Jesus takes the bread and he takes the fish and he blesses it as if it is a sacrament. He blesses it and then he breaks it and puts it into the baskets and he says to his disciples, he gives it to the disciples. He gives it to them. And then what does he do? He says, go out and feed them. Take it out. You take it out. Don't be fooled. You still have work to do. Go, feed them. Carry it out. And they do. And everybody eats and has enough. Everybody has enough. And not only that, not only does everybody have enough, but there are 12 baskets left over. 12 baskets. You should be jumping up and down. If you're at home right now, I hope you're just jumping up and down. It's so exciting. We should all just be so excited. I mean, this is the best thing. It's the good news that there is enough. And also, there's work for us to do. It's on us. If we're going to call ourselves disciples, because we do, we are here calling ourselves disciples of Christ, Christian church disciples of Christ. If we're going to call ourselves disciples, if we're going to say that we follow, if we're going to say, yes, we love Jesus, then pick up a basket and get out there and feed the people. It's not enough to sit and do nothing. It's not enough to lament all that is wrong. That's not what we're called to do. We're not called to comfort. We're called to risk love, to risk healing, to risk caring for, to change the world and bring the realm of God through our action, faith, through love. That's Galatians, in case you're wondering. How hungry are you? What are you hungry for? I'll tell you what I'm hungry for. I want to feed some people. I'm hungry for some real sustenance. I'm hungry for the good news that is God's realm and promise and assurance as I understand it through Jesus, who is the Christ. I'm hungry for that. Are you? Because if we are hungry enough, we will stop looking at what we don't have and start blessing what we have and getting out there and taking care of and healing and moving the church out from the remote area that is isolated, because we can't be isolated in a broken world. We will go to the shore where the people are, where Jesus calls us and gathers us into the wilderness. We got to go. I know it's not Lent. I know we like to metaphorically only go because we think we're in control, only go when it's Lent at the appropriate time, liturgically. But it's already Lent, whether we like it or not. We are Easter people every day, all day. And as Easter people, we have to know that the wilderness is a part of our journey and who we are and where we belong. How hungry are you? I hope you're starving.